That was a great opening, and I think these are just two great organizations that have really helped our state. They've helped our state grow in so many different ways, and so thank you, Marcy, for your leadership on those efforts. I mean, the campaigns that happen now across the state are fundamentally different because of the work of Western Native Voice and Montana Native Vote, and I just think the movement that's happening as a result of that is really phenomenal, and we're going to see the benefits of that for many generations to come. So I'm a little tired today. I didn't sleep too well. I tossed and turned and woke up several times. And when I woke up this morning, I was like, that's the last time I buy a dream catcher from the dollar store. But I'm really pleased and honored to be here. I'm honored to be here as we celebrate our accomplishments and we set our sights on the work yet to be done. And thanks to all of you for undertaking this important work of learning from diverse voices and lending your own to help braid together the issues that matter to all of us. The important work you will do here over the next couple of days has the potential to really move Indian country forward, improving life outcomes for tribal citizens and undoing the inequities that exist for tribal people certainly takes all of us and our persistent attention. When we look at data, and a lot of you work in those areas, American Indians lead in all the wrong areas. And our small numbers of people sometimes put us in the invisible category. We have to work twice as hard to get our voices heard and to get a seat at the table. But when we come together as allies, like in this situation, for our respective issues, our voices combine, our numbers add up, and people sit up and they pay attention. Our efforts and your work is about confronting and wrestling with issues of race, poverty, power, and politics. There's a lot of work to be done. But coming together in settings like this can make a positive difference. Our collective work can lead towards equality and justice for tribal people and communities. And we will never have justice for all until we make sure that every child gets a quality education, that families have safety nets that help them get on their feet, that Mother Earth is restored and reclaimed, that our healthcare system helps keep people's bodies strong and their minds clear, that communities of deep poverty get the tools necessary to achieve the American dream, and that our leaders learn to empower their people instead of tearing them down. So I asked Marcy what she thought I should talk about today. We had a conference call or two, and she told me, just be yourself. You have such a warm personality. And I thought, what a great compliment. And then I looked up the word warm in a dictionary, and it said not so hot. So I'm not sure if that was a compliment. She actually asked me to tell you the story of how I became civically engaged and how that path has led me to some pretty incredible and phenomenal experiences. I grew up in Indian country, and I know all of you know that, up on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And I was raised by a powerhouse duo named Stan and Carol Juneau. My parents went to college in the 60s, and their commitment to advocacy and social justice is as strong today as it is when they were young. Working for equality and justice wasn't some just passing phase they grew out of once they settled down and started a family. My brother and I went to more community meetings than we care to count. And at the time, I might have cared more about playing outside or going to watch TV than I did about attending yet another meeting. However, I'm glad they instilled in me a strong sense of justice and a desire to make sure that everyone, regardless of their economic status, background, or heritage, has the same shot at success. Access to public education and public service are both values that I inherited from my family. My father was an educator, counselor, principal, and served as a superintendent of Browning and Hart Butte. My mom was an educator and director of Browning's first alternative school. Later, she was elected to the Montana legislature as a state representative and then a state senator. My folks were big on making sure American Indian people had access to the voting booth. We registered voters all the time, everywhere we went. And that's how I grew up, going to events to help register voters and having booths and doing that type of work. And I tell this story every now and then. I ran for Congress last 2016, and my dad was going through some heart issues at the same time. And he had this open heart, getting a pacemaker in, the surgery, things that he was going through. And at one time in Great Falls, he was in the room getting waited to get carted off to surgery. And you know how we are. All my cousins came in the room, and big Indians came in and filled that whole room up. And at the same time, my mom was looking around, and as my dad was about to get carted off, she goes, "Is everybody in here registered to vote?" And my cousin raised her hand, and she goes, "You know, I'm not sure." And right then, she whipped out a voter registration card from her purse and registered that person. But that's how we need to be. I was like, this is such a good example, and I'm going to tell this story over and over because that is how we should all be. We should all be carrying voter registration cards right with us right now. I'm at fault for not doing that. I should be doing that. We should be engaged in that effort everywhere we go if we're going to get a voice at the table, if we're going to make sure that we're standing up and speaking, because elections matter. So there was never a question for me and my brother about what it meant to be an engaged citizen. My parents raised us to speak our truth, to advocate for what's right, and to never give up. And I think this room is full of people with that same attitude. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here. And I learned so much from so many people growing up in Browning. And as I think back to those growing up years, I owe a lot to women trailblazers. I've been able to achieve much by standing on the shoulders of strong women who came before me. My grandmother provided me many lessons about sacrifice, hard work, and looking out for others. My mother taught me about giving a voice to those who can't speak, about helping others to see your vision and staying true to your principles and values. And one person that I do think about a lot when the struggle gets real is Eloise Cabell, a woman who had an immense impact on others' lives and a warrior woman who didn't back down in spite of overwhelming obstacles. She's an inspiration. Her life was a lesson in following your values, seeking the truth, fighting for equality, believing in justice, and rising above the obstacles that you face because you know you're right. She was also a constant reminder that when in the midst of all of our hard work of being a warrior for Indian country, don't forget to laugh joyously with friends and to love your family deeply. I often think of her being in those rooms full of attorneys and meeting with federal officials of the highest rank. She fought for 14 years, and after 3 presidents, several judges, 2 contempt citations against cabinet secretaries, more than 3,600 court filings, 220 days of trial, 80 published court decisions, and 10 appeals, she won. And President Obama signed into law a historic $3.4 billion settlement, the largest settlement from the federal government ever. However, she didn't live to see the first payments to the beneficiaries made. And the last time I saw Eloise was about a month before she passed away. She was in hospice in Great Falls, and she was still feisty. She had pictures of recent events around her bed, one with President Bush Sr. and her both receiving honorary doctorates from Dartmouth. And of course, there were pictures of her family all around. And we visited for a while, and she asked how my campaign was going, because I was in the middle of a campaign cycle for superintendent, and how I was enjoying my job, telling me that she was proud of me. And how weird is that, to have one of your sheroes tell you that she is proud of you? Anyway, on my way out the door, as I was saying goodbye, she yelled at me as I walked out the door, and said, "Kick their asses." And now I know she meant more than just my election. She meant that we should not let anyone take advantage of us, that we should stand up and speak truth to power, that we should not tolerate injustice wherever we see it, and that we should expect others to live up to their obligations and their promises, and we should hold our politicians accountable for doing what's right. And she lived those values on a daily basis. And she actually had a little piece of paper tagged onto the back of her computer in her office that had written on it a quote that I know that we've all heard before. And it read, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win." And that quote is so fitting of her life, and I think for all of ours too. Her life and her legacy live on through so many people. Her ability to empower women and communities come alive through the work that all of you do. She represents the ideal that if you stand up for what you believe in, justice will prevail in the end, regardless of how rough that road may be. So I take strength from the lessons from our past generations provided and use them during my public service. I was so very proud and honored to be the top advocate for public education for 8 years. And I'm proud of the things we got done during my tenure. We raised graduation rates to historic highs. We raised academic standards. We turned around low-performing schools, increased access to school-based mental health programs, increased farm-to-school efforts, and so much more. And I got to see most of Montana. I drove a lot of the roads all across this state. I crisscrossed nearly every highway and stopped to learn about the people in every corner of our state. And I tell a couple stories always just because they are examples of good stories, but I went up to one small school up in south central Montana, way out there. And I don't know if a superintendent had ever visited them, but it had been really a long time. And as I walked into the school, these first graders gathered together and they had built all these little fruit baskets and little thank you cards and came in. And the teacher was like, they've been so excited to meet you. Here's all their stuff. And this little guy's been so excited. He researched you all week just to know who you are. And she kept asking me for 2 days now, when is she coming? When is Miss Montana coming? So it's like, that little kid gets an A for the day. Being superintendent was a great job, and it allowed me to experience some really good stuff. But first and foremost, being an elected official helped me to live out my commitment of helping others reach their potential, helping to lift up families, all of them, making sure that everyone has the opportunity to build a better future and has a real opportunity to succeed. I observed what happens when people are empowered not only to survive, but to thrive. When Montana elected me in 2008, I became the first American Indian woman to serve in a statewide elected executive position anywhere in the country. And you think about the importance of what that is in our nation and particularly to our state. And that's because, there's a long history, a traumatic history of American Indian involvement in public voting, in public service, in public education. And in 2008, we were able to rise above all of that. Let's skip a little bit. And although our history of involvement in America is not long and it's often traumatic, we have to remember that we've accomplished so much as American Indian people. The fact that we are sitting in this room together, talking about how we will unite, collaborate, and build understanding is a testament to our strength. And while we sometimes struggle with lateral oppression or crabs in the bucket thinking, we can overcome it by working together, by taking our egos out of it and moving beyond turf wars. And I know big things can happen when we decide to work together to change things. Because I think about Indian education for all. In Montana, we are making sure all students receive an education that includes American Indian history, culture, and contemporary issues. And I know that these future state, tribal, and national leaders are going to make better decisions and have better opportunity to work toward justice for all because they will not be scared of the other. They will know that differences exist, be able to talk about those differences, and at the end of the day, look across the table and understand each other as human beings, lending to the fabric of our communities. And while we should celebrate Montana's implementation of Indian education for all, we need to also recognize that it did not happen overnight, and we certainly are not done. Getting to the point we are now took a lot of work from many people for many, many years. It took political action, community and statewide advocacy, legislative action, and even a Montana Supreme Court case. But we got it done. Montana is now an exemplar for the nation. Several other states have passed their own legislation, and they're working with their tribes so that they can tell their own story in their education systems. I'm so proud of the work that we did in Montana to lead that effort. And I like to think about the future of the kindergarten students after they're educated in a system where Indian education for all is robust across the school. Just think of the type of leaders they're going to be and how far our state will have progressed in race relations. It's going to be phenomenal. And Indian education for all happened because people focused on a common purpose, strategized, planned, and implemented. Part of the strategy was to get American Indians in places of power so they could help get it done. So again, elections mattered. We had Indian legislators we could count on to push, pull, and sometimes shove others towards policy change. Then we had allies who made sure the law got implemented. I'm happy that I got to play some small part in that effort. And I'm happy that now that I'm out of elected office, I'll still watch it grow. And when I was growing up in Browning on the Blackfeet Reservation, I would have never believed it possible to be a statewide elected official. And I certainly never thought I would have ever launched a campaign for Congress, but I did. And that's what's great about our country and our state, that anything really is possible, what with hard work and lots of support. It is possible to go from Head Start to Harvard. And it is possible to go from a small rural Indian reservation to Congress, and that will happen someday. I've given just a few speeches since running for our lone U.S. House seat this past election cycle, and I'm proud of the campaign that my team and I ran. It was positive, it was based on the issues important to everyday Montanans, and sadly, I'm not here speaking to you as Congresswoman, but I do look forward to a bright future, and I know the right opportunity will present itself. But in the meantime, if you hear of anything good, you can find me on LinkedIn. I was inspired every day by people I met on the campaign trail, and I know that being the first American Indian woman elected to statewide office has made it easier for the next American Indian to win a statewide office in Montana. And I know that my congressional campaign motivated American Indian people. I can tell when I meet American Indian people, that, especially young ones, they started thinking that they can also run for statewide office and maybe even president of the United States, and they can win. One day during the election, my friend who I grew up with in Browning posted a story on her Facebook page, and the memories come up, so I just saw this again. And it read, "Yesterday was so fun. The boys and I went to town, talked about Christmas, fishing, and everything else. We got to town, and Lance, who's her son, sees a vote for Denise Juneau sign. And he says, 'Grandma, Denise is going to make good rules and good laws, huh?' I said, 'Yes, she is great and a great and wise woman.' He then said, 'Grandma, you have a Vote Denise Juneau sign on your car.' I told him, 'Yes, she's been my friend for many years. We grew up together and played together, and we were also neighbors.' And he was all excited. So I showed him where I used to live and said that Denise lived across the street. I showed him where we went to high school. To make a long story short, no matter how this election turns out, I just want Denise to know what a great role model she is for our kids. She has shown them that no matter where you come from, you can make a difference in this world.' Now that's not why I ran for office, but what a great side effect. I think that's really what our work collectively is all about. As we strive to make our community, state, and country a better place, we have to remind ourselves that our kids are watching and that they're learning from us. Part of creating an equal playing field for young people is knowing that representation matters. It matters who sits in the seats of power. Better policy gets created when our elected officials offer more diverse voices. It's why we need more American Indians and we need more women to run for office. People need representation that looks like them and has shared experiences with them and understands their life circumstances. I watched it happen when I ran for office. Who the candidate is does matter to people. I met a 75-year-old woman on the Blackfeet Reservation who voted for the first time ever. I know Joey, and he has a family. When I was in law school, helped them adopt Joey into their family. And he turned 18 during my election cycle, and he cast his very first vote for me. I know because I was at a fundraiser, and a young American Indian girl came to an event, and she was writing something for school, and she had all these series of questions. And her very last question was, "How do I become more like you?" I know because when I walk into a small rural school in Montana and I meet a young lesbian who wants to start a gay-straight alliance in her school and felt brave enough to talk to me about it because she knows I would get it. And I know elected office and campaigning, it's actually fun most of the time, until the ads with the ugliest picture you've ever seen of yourself presenting you as the worst person in the world show up. Mine had me with some really mean side eye. I kind of liked it. It was like screenshot. It was like I might save that for later. But I'm so happy that this conference is happening because it's time. It's time for us to come together as American Indian people to strive toward making a positive difference, particularly for young people. We must continue to speak up at every opportunity and in every setting so we can combat the institutional racism we know exists in our system. We know how the impacts of historical trauma play out in our respective workplaces. We know the power of low expectations, and we know how oppression feels. We know social justice work is hard and that it can get overwhelming, and yet we keep on. And we also need allies. There aren't enough of us to be proactive on every front. We need allies in all shapes, colors, and sizes on every issue. We need to tell our stories, and we need to allow others to tell theirs, because each of our stories is important. I've learned that each one of us has an important role to play in making our community and our world a better place. We draw strength and resolve from the people who came before us, and we have a duty to the generations who come after us to continue to bend the arc of history toward justice. Our challenge and our opportunity is to stand together to protect the progress we've gained and to work for an even better tomorrow. Our work is vitally important in today's context. We must find a way through our bitter politics and our ideological divides. The only way we will thrive as American Indian people is to work together to make things better for the next generation. And I know we're currently in a place where our outlook can sometimes be discouraging, but I also know that the people with the most optimism, hands down, every time, are young people. They are not afraid to dream big. They have faith that things can be better, and they have amazing resiliency. They show us time and again that minds and hearts can change if we learn to appreciate and understand our differences and be reminded that there is so much more we have in common than sets us apart. That's why our work is always focused on the next 7 generations. I've also met parents whose greatest hope is that their children live happy and healthy lives. I've talked with elders who still have the fire in their belly and the spark in their eyes to work toward positive change. They believe that we can and that we will do better. Their faith in the future fuels me to continue my work. I believe our most important work is to do whatever we can to achieve equality and justice in our lifetime. That work is more important now than ever before. When my mom was a state legislator, every day they would stand to give the Pledge of Allegiance. And she would end the pledge and justice for all with her quiet someday. So I think we should take on that challenge. So at some point we can say to ourselves, and justice for all today. Collectively, we have the knowledge, the resources, the ability to bring about the changes that we want to see. And more importantly, I believe we have the courage and the conviction to see it through. So thank you for all of your work on behalf of the next generation, and I'm excited to see the outcome of this work. Thanks for having me.